I mean, Obama's election obviously does testify to the increased commitment to diversity. And one could add other things too, and again, as in France. I mean, when we're talking now, there's this huge outcry over le mariage gay. And you know, in the US as well, this has been a central issue. If you think about it in the US, or probably in France too, if someone had said 20 years ago that now there would be on the agenda homosexual marriage, if you said that in the US 20 years ago, people would have thought you lost your mind. Why has that become so comparatively successful? Precisely because it does testify to our commitment to increased anti-discrimination. Now, if you compare that with the health plan actually involves something more than anti-discrimination. It actually involves some redistribution of wealth. Now, it's actually the case that Obama's health plan involves very, very little redistribution of wealth. It's a striking fact that, give him credit, he has tried to do it. It's a more striking fact that many, many people who gladly would support Obama, many, many people who gladly support gay marriage, many, many people who think of themselves as politically on the left because they completely are committed to anti-discrimination, have absolutely no desire for their money, the money that they think of themselves as having earned, to be spent on somebody else's health care. So from that standpoint, the U.S. not only remains a very conservative nation, but actually, as it's become more committed to diversity and anti-discrimination, it's actually become more conservative with respect to the problem of class. It's not clear. 13.2% of the American population is African American. What good does having one of them be president do? It's made no difference whatsoever for them. If Obama had actually pursued policies which would make the poor less poor and make the rich less rich, then because so many of the poor are African American, it would have done them some good. But in fact, Obama's presidency has done nothing for African Americans, not because he's prejudiced against African Americans, obviously, right? It's done nothing for African Americans because it's done nothing for poor people. And as we know, African Americans are disproportionately poor in the U.S. If you wanted to do something for the African American population in the U.S., the best possible thing you could do would be a color blind. Don't worry about anybody's color. Just give lots of money to poor people. That would help African Americans. Obama has shown no interest in giving lots of money to poor people. He's been very, very good at saving the banks, that is the rich people, and killing people with drones in the East. You know, I should say I've always loved France. I've come here often. I used to study French literature. And one of the things that one likes about France is that it's not, in many respects, like the United States. So I'm sad to say that in lots of respects, it's becoming much more like the United States. If you look at the data, Camille Landais is an economist who's worked on this in France. If you look at the data about French inequality is growing. If you look around you, you can see just with your eyes that the increase in chômage, the increase in poverty in the banlieue, and you can see, and this is the most distressing part, that in France, increasingly, the response to those problems is not actually to deal with the question sociale, to deal with the problem of inequality of classes. The response is the American response, diversity. As if you take a few kids out of the banlieue and you enable them to succeed, that would create more equality. That doesn't create any more equality at all. It just takes the elite, and the French elite is currently primarily white and primarily male, and it adds some women and some people of color, but it leaves it just as elite as it was, and it leaves the vast majority of the population in the banlieue and elsewhere completely untouched and unaided. In the United States, we didn't have to change the words. We never had much of a language to describe people who were exploited, and we still don't have any language to describe people who are exploited. So yeah, I see the point of the French. I hadn't even thought of that. But as I say, in the U.S., there's always been a strong sense. You know, the U.S. has always been a country where everybody identified themselves as belonging to the middle class. And one of the reasons there's never been a successful left in the U.S. is because it's obvious that rich people don't think of themselves as exploiters. But we've always, in the U.S., managed to convince poor people that they weren't, in fact, exploited. That's what's called the American dream. You know, when you started out, the first question you asked me was about how I started teaching, how I started getting interested in this. I said I was writing on American literature of the 1920s. So perhaps the most famous text of the 1920s is The Great Gatsby. The Great Gatsby is famously about what every American child learns from the time he or she can first open his or her mouth, the importance of the American dream. The American dream is what? You can start out poor and get rich. That dream is not true now. And you're better off, if you want to start out poor and getting rich, moving to Berlin, learning German. There's more social mobility there. But the truth is, it's never been very true in American life. The great success of American capitalism has been convincing people that it was true, that they never were exploited, they just were taking the chance on their dream.